Hey crew, it's Pete, and I'm back with another Bible study. Today we are going to be jumping into something new, right? This is Samuel. This is the first book of Samuel, and we are going to be dealing with how he came into being today. Uh, Before we do, if you are unaware of what I am doing here, I hold some very unconventional beliefs, and I would recommend that you start in Genesis and work your way through rather than to jump in here because it may be a little bit overwhelming if you hold conventional beliefs. With that being said, for those of you who have been here and those of you who are just joining in, we're going to talk about Samuel. Samuel is one of the two Nazirites that we actually get some information about, right? We got Samson and we got Samuel. And so we're going to get into the story of Samuel, so let's go ahead and dive into the text. Now there was a man named Elkanah who was from Ramathaim Zophim in the hill country of Ephraim. If I murder the names, I'm sorry, it's not intentional. And he was the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. And he had two wives, one named Hannah, and the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Where are we talking about? Let's look at Google Earth real quick. We are just north of Jerusalem. This is Israel as a whole, right? We have control, for the most part, of all the blue dots and some extra over here that I did not put blue dots on. But Samuel is just north of Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem. This is the Dead Sea. Let's go ahead and take this out for now. This is Jerusalem. This is the Dead Sea over here. This is the Jordan River. This is the Mediterranean. And just to the northeast or northwest, we have the tomb of Samuel, which is pretty much, as far as we can tell, located in the birthplace of Samuel. So where we're talking about specifically for him being born is, as far as we can tell, right here in the Nevi Samuel National Park. There will be more locations. We'll get to them in just a second. And the year after Elkanah would go up from his year after year, Elkanah would go up from his city to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests to the Lord. All right, so now we're talking about Shiloh, and Shiloh is up here where these red dots are, right here. This is the holy place where the tabernacle currently resides in this portion of history, right? It was over here at Gilgal. There was a lot of worship that happened there for a long time. Then it moved up to Mount Gerizim. It was there for a while, and now it is here in Shiloh. And that's where everybody goes to make their sacrifices because it is against the rules to make sacrifices anywhere else. And where Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. And whenever the day came for Elkanah to present his sacrifice, he would give portions to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved her even though the Lord had closed her womb. Now remember, when they made sacrifice, a portion of that goes to the priest, a portion of that goes to God, and a portion of that they get returned to them to eat, right? And he gets to dish out who gets what from that sacrifice. So he receives the food back, and he's giving all of his people food, but he's giving the best of it to Hannah. He loves her more than he loves his other wife, even though his other wife has provided children. And you are kind of restricted from doing that. And because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival would provoke her and taunt her viciously, which again is against the rules. And this went on year after year. And whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival taunted her until she wept and would not eat. Hannah, why are you crying? Her husband Elkanah asked. Why won't you eat? Why is your heart so grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? Now that's an interesting interaction right there because what are we talking about here? Depression, right? She is obviously depressed about this situation and she is being oppressed in her depression by the second wife, the other wife thing. She's got his love, but she's got his babies. And that's not an ideal situation for a woman, believe it or not. And On top of that, the other woman is picking on her. It's like, you can't even have a kid. You can't even have a kid. So she's oppressing her while she's in her depression from not being able to do her womanly duties. And then this guy's like, what's wrong with you? You should be eating. What's wrong? I'm not good enough for you? So, of course, turn it around and make it about you. And soon after they finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up, and now Eli the priest was sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. And in her bitter distress, Hannah prayed to the Lord and wept many tears. She made a vow, pleading, O Lord of hosts, if only you will look upon the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, not forgetting your maidservant, but giving her a son, then I will dedicate him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall ever come over his head. And as Hannah kept on praying before the Lord, Eli watched her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and though her lips were moving, her voice could not be heard. And so Eli thought she was drunk, and said to her, How long will you be drunk? Put away your wine. No, my lord, Hannah replied, I am a woman oppressed in spirit. I have not had any wine or strong drink, but I have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman, for all this time I have been praying out of the depths of my anguish and grief. And go in peace, Eli replied, and may the God of Israel grant the petition you have asked of him. May your maidservant find favor with you, says Hannah. And she went on her way, and she began eating again, and her face was no longer downcast. So, what happens is, she is both oppressed and depressed, and she goes to the house of the Lord. And she sits before the altar, and she's praying, but she's not praying out loud where everybody's going to take notice of her. She's praying in the depths of her heart. And her mouth is moving, because sometimes that happens to some of us. When we talk inside of ourselves, then our lips move. That happens sometimes. But this priest is so unused to seeing someone in prayer that he thinks she's drunk. He is so used to seeing people drunk in the house of prayer that he thinks that's what's wrong with her. Isn't that something? Isn't that something to contemplate, to think about? Is that this priest is unused to seeing someone praying fervently for the Lord. Now, I have been in a situation where I have had to pray fervently, and I try to pray fervently these days when I don't have to be in the situation. But to be a priest consecrated to God who lives your life at the temple, and you're not used to seeing somebody praying, that says an awful lot about something. That says an awful lot about the relationship that is held, because these people come up and they do a transaction. They come up to this altar with a cow and a goat and all of these things, and they're like, here, take this. But they're not saying prayers. They're not giving thanks. They're not worshiping. They're not asking for it. They're going up and they're sacrificing their thing, and they're going to sit down and eat, and that's enough. And there's a lesson to be taken in that, because it is not enough to just go about your life and to one day a year pop up and give lip service to God. It's not enough. You should be living your life. If you are a changed person, you should be fervently praying for the things that you desire, because God says, ask and you shall receive, knock and it shall be get, the door shall be open, right? And so do your part and ask. God will do his part and provide. And don't be to someone that people think you're drunk when you're praying. Pray enough that people know that you're praying and not drunk. All right. And the next morning, Elkanah and Hannah got up early to bow and worship before the Lord, and then returned home to Ramah. And Elkanah had relations with his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. So, in the course of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth. And she named him Samuel, saying, because I have asked for him from the Lord. And then Elkanah went to and all his house went up to make the annual sacrifice to the Lord, and to fulfill his vow. But Hannah did not go. After the boy is weaned, she said to the husband, I will take him to appear before the Lord and to stay there permanently. Do what you think is best, her husband Elkanah replied, and stay here until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord confirm his word. So Hannah stayed and nursed her son until she had weaned him. And once she had weaned him, Hannah took the boy with her, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine. And though the boy was still young, she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. And when they had slaughtered the bull, they brought the boy to Eli. Please, my lord, said Hannah, as surely as you live, my lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this boy, and since the Lord has granted me what I asked of him, I now dedicate the boy to the Lord. For as long as he lives, he is dedicated to the Lord. And so they worshiped there. And at that time Hannah prayed, my heart rejoices in the Lord, in whom my horn is exalted. I did a word study on horn, and it's a little interesting, but it's not worth talking about. My mouth speaks boldly against my enemies, for I rejoice in your salvation. There is no one holy like the Lord. Indeed, there is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Do not boast so proudly, or let arrogance come from your mouth, for the Lord is a God who knows, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble are equipped with strength. The well-fed hire themselves out for food, but the starving hunger no more. The barren woman gives birth to 7, but she who has many sons pines away. The Lord brings death and gives life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord sends poverty and wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them among princes and bestows on them a throne of honor. For the foundations of the earth are the Lord's, and upon them he has set the world. He guards the steps of his faithful ones, but the wicked perish in the darkness. For by his own strength shall no man prevail. Those who oppose the Lord will be shattered. He will thunder from heaven against them. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give power to his king. He will exalt the horn of his anointed. And then Elkanah went home to Ramah, but the boy began ministering before Eli the priest. Let's look at this word right here. This is the word anointed. Some of you may recognize this word. This word is Mashiach. You've heard it many times as the voice of the Messiah, HaMashiach, the anointed one. Here's something. The anointed one is used a lot. And it means pretty much the exact same thing every time. Not just in a single instance does it change. It may be interpreted that way because of circumstances. But all that the Messiah is the anointed of God. Right? Now there is the anointed priest who is anointed in oil, and there is the anointed priest who is anointed in blood. But the anointing in truth comes from God. And so this is the first time it is used somewhat in the Messianic way. In the way of there will be coming forth, like this is where all prophecy really starts to begin, is in 1 Samuel. And we're going to talk about a couple more instances where Isaiah is pulling his inspiration from, just like this. And so this is where the first of the horns is exposed. This is the first of the power of the king. This is the judge of the earth. This is all of those things really coming to a head and starting to become something other than, right? Sheol is still, at this point, not hell as we conceive it. There is no burning, damning eternity revealed in the Old Testament. That's not a thing. There is the separation from where we are now, right? And you return to Sheol. And Sheol is thought to be under the ground, but it's really the concept of death. It is the returning to God that is the Sheol. And when he returns you, like he goes down to Sheol and raises up, he brings death and gives life. That is the return of the soul to the mortal coil so that it can experience. And I'll talk about that in other places. But the main point to take away from this is that it is giving the honor to God. I asked for this thing, I was given this thing, and I am giving this thing willingly to God. It was not necessarily a requirement, even after the blessing, for her to follow through. It was wise of her to do so, but it was not really a requirement. And she did, and she is willing and grateful for it. And she is giving the honor in the place that it is due for the thing that has happened. And that is good. That is absolutely the path, the way, the truth, and the light, is giving the proper respect where it properly goes. Then Elkanah went home to Ramah, but the boy began ministering to the Lord before Eli the priest. And ministering to the Lord is service, right? This is not necessarily preaching to the priest. Like some people will take it that way. But this is, he was learning the duties. He became basically an apprentice priest, right? He's not a Levite. He's not. He's not from the tribe of Levi. Where he is from is it says it right here, Ephraim, right? So he's not a Levite living in Ephraim. We didn't get that designation. He is someone devoted to God from outside of the tribe of Levite, and that is something else that is an unusual thing happening right now. Now the sons of Eli were wicked men, and they had no regard for the Lord or for the custom of the priest with the people. When any man offered a sacrifice, the servant of the priest would come up with a three-pronged meat fork. There might be some symbology in that, right? While the meat was boiling, and plunge it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or cooking pot, whatever you happen to have going on. And the priest would claim for himself whatever the meat fork brought up. And this was how they treated all the Israelites who came to Shiloh. Even before the fat was burned, the servant of the priest would come and say to the man who was sacrificing, "Give the priest some meat to roast, because he will not accept boiled meat from you, but only raw." And if any man said to him, "The fat must be burned first, then you may take whatever you want," the servant would reply, "No, you must give it to me right now. And if you refuse, I will take it by force." Thus the sins of these young men was severe in the sight of the Lord, for they were treating the Lord's offering with contempt. Now, Samuel was ministering before the Lord, a boy wearing a linen ephod. Each year his mother would make him a little robe and bring it to him when she went with her husband to make the annual sacrifice. And Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife, saying, "May the Lord give you children by this woman, in place of the one she dedicated to the Lord." And then they would go home. And so the Lord attended to Hannah, and she conceived and gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, the boy Samuel will grow up in the presence of the Lord. Now, Eli was very old, and he heard about everything his sons were doing to all Israel, and how they were sleeping with the women who served at the entrance to the tent of meeting. "Why are you doing these things?" Eli said to his son. "I hear about your wicked deeds from all these people." "No, my sons, it is not a good report I hear circulating among the Lord's people. If a man sins against another man, God can intercede for him. But if a man sins against the Lord, who can intercede for him?" But they would not listen to their father, since the Lord intended to put them to death. And the boy Samuel continued to grow in stature and in favor with the Lord and with man. Now, what's going on here? What are we being told here? Because we're supposed to pull a lesson from this, and there is a lesson here. What are the priests of the Lord doing? They are going through naming and claiming. They are going through prosperity gospeling. They are going through worksing. That's what they're doing. There is no grace involved in this whatsoever. There is no forgiveness from sin. This is them taking what they are entitled to because they serve the Lord. We can most definitely draw some correlations with our current situations. I'm not putting down on the house of the Lord, right? If you are in a congregation and you want to build a beautiful house to represent your love for the Lord, that is fine, that is good. I am taking exception with the name it and claim it priest, simply because it's not that God doesn't want to bless you. It is the fruits of the labors that bear out, right? You look at Kenneth Copeland, and to call him out by name, that's a demon. You look at Kenneth Copeland and the fruits of his labor. While there are many people who think they know God, they have no clue. They are going through this thinking that because they said something and they're saying something, that they don't have to change their lives, that they can just go about and do. Kenneth Copeland has said some things, and I'm not going to call particular instances out, but he has said some things, and because I don't want to misquote, but I know that he has said some things that are directly contradictory to the nature of God himself. And so we can draw a direct correlation to what is going on and the consequences that are coming from that with the current church in many denominations. And I singled out Copeland, but there are many. And it is not necessarily all mega churches. There are plenty of little churches where the same mess is going around. You know the Lord's business. I'm calling out any pastor who happens to have stuck around this long in this Bible study, but I'm calling you out directly. You know exactly what's supposed to be going on. And you know exactly what your committees are actually achieving and what they are actually not. And you can talk about your outreach and the basketball outreach. And sometimes those are good. Sometimes they actually do work. But in a lot of cases, the only people playing basketball in them leagues are the people in the church. The only people playing soccer in them leagues are people in the church. It's a community club. And that's good. You should have fellowship. You should have some iron to sharpen yourself against. But are you sharpening yourself against iron? And this, it gets even worse than just taking and the naming and the claiming, because they are directly breaking the laws of God. Because what's it say about adultery? It's quite clear about adultery, right? But it doesn't really specify about fornication about that. Like, people take adultery to include fornication. Adultery, for the most part, is breaking the commitment of a vow more than just sleeping around, right? Because you can be in an open relationship. There's a very minuscule group of people who that is actually the best for. And you can be open and honest and all of those things that are good in that relationship and get the good out of it, right? And there is no adultery in that situation. But you can also be a sneaky snake and be sliding in the back door and doing all of the things that the milkman does. And that's a whole different situation. That is adultery, right? Because the level of deception and things that are going on. Anything that two grown, consensual people agree to among themselves is not my business. God can take that up with them now. You can have as many partners at a time as you can currently handle, as long as you know that it is the right thing and there's no adultery situations. I would not suggest it because most people are not built that way. And the chances of finding two people that can share each other with someone else is astronomical. The chances of finding three is much larger than that. And so it is a possibility, but it is not a likely one. The adultery situation has to do with the heart, right? And these are men in service to God. And their adultery is not, even if these women are married, it is, but their adultery is with God. They are sworn in the service of God and are breaking that oath. Like, yeah, they were doing it with the material things. That's for sure. But that in particular, this sleeping with the women who served at the entrance of the tent of meeting, that's a big deal because you are consecrated to God. You are set apart. And that's a big deal. And then a man of God came to Eli and told him, and this is what the Lord says. Did I not clearly reveal myself to your father's house when we were in Egypt, under Pharaoh's house? And out of all the tribes of Israel, I selected your father to be my priest, to offer sacrifices on my altar, to burn incense, and to wear an ephod in my presence. And I also gave to the house of your father all the offerings of the Israelites made by fire. Why then do you kick at my sacrifice and offering that I have prescribed for my dwelling place? You have honored your sons more than me by fattening yourselves with the best of all the offerings of my people Israel. And therefore the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, I did indeed say that your house and the house of your father would walk with me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me. For I will honor those who honor me, but those who despise me will be disdained. Behold, the days are coming when I will cut off your strength and the strength of your father's house, so that no older man will be left in your house. You will see distress in my dwelling place. Despite all that is good in Israel, no one in your house will ever again reach old age. And every one of you that I do not cut off from my altar, your eyes will fail, and your heart will grieve. All your descendants will die by the swords of men. And this sign shall come to you concerning your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. They will both die on the same day. And then I will raise up for myself a faithful priest, and he will do whatever is in my heart and mind. And I will build for him an enduring house, and he will walk before my anointed one for all time. And everyone left in your house will come and bow down to him for a piece of silver or a morsel of bread, pleading, please appoint me to some priestly office so that I can eat a piece of bread. And thus fails the Levites. Now, I'm not sure if this was the entirety of the Levites, but at least this line of it is done, about to die, right? That is, the prophecy given is that the house of Eli, the house of Eli is about to go out. And his sons Hophni and Phinehas are going to die, and nobody else ever in his bloodline will live to be an old man. And the boy Samuel ministered to the Lord before Eli. Now, in those days, the word of the Lord was rare, and visions were scarce. And at that time Eli, whose eyesight had grown so dim that he could not see, was lying in his room. And before the lamp of God had gone out, Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was located. And then the Lord called to Samuel, and he answered, Here I am. He ran to Eli and said, Here I am, you've called me. I did not call, Eli replied. Go back and lay down. And he went and lay down, and once again the Lord called, Samuel. So Samuel got up and went to Eli, and he said, Here I am, for you have called me. My son, I did not call. He said, Go back and lay down. And Samuel did not yet know the Lord, because the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. And once again, for the third time, the Lord called Samuel. And he got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you have called me. And then Eli realized that it was the Lord who was calling the boy. Go and lie down, he said to Samuel. And if he calls you, say, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. And so Samuel went and lay down in his place. And then the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel answered, Speak, for your servant is listening. And then the Lord said to Samuel, I am about to do something in Israel, at which the ears of all who hear it will tingle. On that day, I will carry out against Eli everything I have spoken about his family, from beginning to end. I told him that I would judge his house forever for the iniquity of which he knows, because his sons blasphemed God and he did not restrain them. Therefore I have sworn to the house of Eli, the iniquity of Eli's house shall never be atoned for by sacrifice or offering. The problem I have here is the problem that we have seen before. We have a direct promise from God that the sins of the fathers will not be carried out on the children. Now, the two sons of Eli earned what they got. Eli, you can argue, absolutely earned what he had coming because he was in charge of making sure that they did what was supposed to be done. He was the high priest. It was his job to make sure they were in line, and he didn't have the stones for it. Because remember what is called for in the time, right? Remember what Caleb had to do? That's what's called for there, according to God. And Samuel lay down until the morning, and he opened the doors of the house of the Lord. And he was afraid to tell Eli the vision, but Eli called to him and said, Samuel, my son. Here I am, answered Samuel. What was the message he gave you? Eli asked. Do not hide it from me. May God punish you, and ever so severely, if you hide from me anything he said to you. And so Samuel told him everything, and did not hide a thing from him. He is the Lord, replied Eli. Let him do what is good in his eyes. And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and he let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground. And so all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was confirmed as a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, because he revealed himself to Samuel by his word. And then the word of Samuel came to all Israel. And this is how they come to know, right? Like it says right here that they all came to know, and this is how it's explained next. And thus the word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now the Israelites went out to meet the Philistines in battle and camped at Ebenezer, while the Philistines camped at Aphek. I'm not going to look that geography up. I should, but I'm not. The Philistines arrayed themselves against Israel, and as the battle spread, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who struck down about 4,000 men on the battlefield. And when the troops returned to the camp, the elders of Israel asked, Why has the Lord brought defeat on us before the Philistines today? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord from Shiloh, so that it may go with us to save us from the hands of our enemies. So the people sent men to Shiloh, and they brought back the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who sit enthroned between the cherubim. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. And when the ark of the covenant of the Lord entered the camp, all the Israelites raised such a great shout that it shook the ground. On hearing the noise of the shout, the Philistines asked, What is this loud shouting in the camp of the Hebrews? And when they realized that the ark of the Lord had entered the camp, the Philistines were afraid. The gods have entered their camp, they said. Woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us! Who will deliver us from the hands of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck down the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness. Take courage and be men, O Philistines. Otherwise you will serve the Hebrews just as they served you. That's interesting. When did that happen? Now, be men and take fight, or be men and fight. So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and each man fled to his tent. And the slaughter was very great. 30,000 foot soldiers of Israel fell. The ark of the God was captured, and Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, died. So the ark of the covenant went, and they weren't able to pull out the victory that they were expecting. I wonder why. Maybe they had lost a little bit of knowledge by this point. They didn't know they were doing. They just thought it being there was enough. It wasn't. It takes some direction. You got to have the shamir and use that. That same day, a Benjamite ran from the battle line all the way to Shiloh with his clothes torn and dirt on his head. And when he arrived, there was Eli sitting in his chair beside the road and watching, because his heart trembled for the ark of God. And when the man entered the city to give the report, the whole city cried out. And Eli heard the outcry and asked, "Why is this commotion?" So the man hurried over and reported to Eli. Now, Eli was 98 years old, and his gaze was fixed because he could not see. And if you're aware of what the ark is, that's not a surprise. "I have just come from the battle," the man said to Eli. I fled from there today." "What happened, my son?" Eli asked. And the messenger answered, "Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has been a great slaughter among the people. Your 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are both dead, and the ark of God has been captured." As soon as the ark was mentioned, Eli fell backward from his chair by the city gate, and being old and heavy, he broke his neck and died. And Eli had judged Israel for 40 years. Now, Eli's daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant and about to give birth. And when she heard the news of the capture of God's ark and the deaths of her father-in-law and her husband, she collapsed and gave birth, for her labor pains overtook her. As she was dying, the women attending to her said, "Do not be afraid, for you have given birth to a son." But she did not respond or pay any heed. And she named the boy Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel," because the ark of God had been captured, and her father-in-law and her husband had been killed. "The glory has departed from Israel," she said, "for the ark of God has been captured." We'll read through this next part. After the Philistines had captured the ark of God, they took it from Ebenezer to Ashdod, and carried it to the temple of Dagon, and set it beside a statue. This is in the Gaza Strip. And when the people of Ashdod got up early the next morning, there was Dagon, fallen on his face before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and returned him to his place. But when they got up early the next morning, there was Dagon, fallen on his face before the ark of the Lord, with his head and his hands broken off, and lying on the threshold. Only the torso remained. That is why to this day the priest of Dagon and all who enter the temple of Dagon in Ashdod do not step on the threshold. Now, this is an interesting thing. I'm not quite sure what the idol that they used for Dagon was, but it had a head and hands, right? And whatever it was, being in the presence of the ark caused it to have some kind of a disturbance. Or somebody went in there and broke some stuff. Now, knowing what we know about electromagnetics and harmonics and things, and knowing that the ark must be kept in very controlled circumstances or there's going to be problems, I'm going to speculate a little bit here. I'm going to assume that Dagon is made out of stone, because they are quite astonished that it breaks into pieces. And possibly the first time falling, it weakened the joints of the extremities. And then the second time, what happened was the electromagnetics, which was what caused it to fall in the first place, caused a like and like type of situation and snapped them off at a weak point and kind of magnetized the stone in such a way that it went to the threshold, which was probably made out of a similar material. That is, of course, pure speculation. That is me spitballing what I consider probably a likely situation. There is no doubt in my mind that the ark affects electromagnetics, that it gives off an aura, that it has to be contained, that it can be directed. I believe all of those things. We don't have it to test it, so it can never be proven. It is going to remain a mystery until we get home. But that is my belief and my most logical conclusion. Now, the hand of the Lord was heavy on the people of Ashdod and its vicinity, ravaging them and afflicting them with tumors. And when the men of Ashdod saw what was happening, they said, the ark of the God of Israel must not stay with us, because his hand is heavy with us, and upon our god Dagon. This tumor is interesting, right? Let's go ahead and pop it out. I did a word study on it, and it's only mildly interesting, so bear with me. This could mean a mound, a boil, or an hemorrhoid. Right? In this instance, when they use it, it means a mound or a boil. Right? Here, the tumor means a mound, a fortress. Maybe it's in the other one that it means boil. But we'll see the other one here in a minute. But it also means, that's Mashiach, wrong tab. It also does mean a boil, or the other use of the same word, right? Because it's translated to mean tumors later, but in the other place it's more implied that it's a hemorrhoid, that it's something that's falling out of their butt. And so they sent the ark of God to Ekron, but as it arrived, the Ekronites cried out, "They have brought the ark of the God of Israel in order to kill us and our people." And then the Ekronites assembled all the rulers of Philistine and said, "Send the ark of God, send away the ark of God of Israel. It must return to its place so that it will not kill us and our people." For a deadly confusion had pervaded the city. The hand of God was heavy upon it. Those who did not die were afflicted with tumors, and the outcry of the city went up to heaven. That again is the side effects of this radioactive device not being properly contained, in my opinion, right? That is what I think is coming from this. And this thing is powered in two separate ways, right? In the one way, through the tent, the tabernacle is connected into it in a way that it conducts electricity to it. And then you can then use the capacitor to discharge the charge through the use of the shamir. And it is also powered, apparently, through vibrations and through not just the movement of it, but like the vibrations around it. Part of the sound dampening is what happens with these heavy cloths, besides creating the static electricity, because they're trying to control what the output is. I think that the electricity has one effect and that the sound has a different effect. We saw evidence of one thing at Jericho and another thing in other places. And so what's probably happened here is that this thing has become disturbed because of being moved from place to place without the proper insulation, and the people around it feeding it with energy. And so it is magnifying that energy and relaying it back out into the world, and it's causing great confusion and killing people and causing tumors and all kinds of problems. All right, we'll do this and then we'll wrap it up. And when the ark of the Lord had been in the land of the Philistines 7 months, the Philistines summoned the priests and diviners. "What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how to send it back to its place." And they replied, "If you return the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it away empty, but by all means return it to him with a guilt offering. Then you will be healed, and you will understand why his hand has not been lifted from you." "What gift offering should we send back to him?" asked the Philistines. 5 gold tumors and 5 gold rats. This is where it's different. I'm not going to pop it out, but this is where it's boils or hemorrhoids, right? When they ask, "How do I quantify this?" they say, "Send back gold tumors." And boils can get rather large, but for the most part, they're like like a shooter marble, like a big marble, right? So that's not all that big, and hemorrhoids aren't all that big. So it's just an interesting quantification. Like, how do you say send back 5 gold tumors? Rats, okay, you can approximate the size of a rat and make the shape of a rat. It also doesn't mention the fact that rats are part of the affliction, right? That's interesting to know considering some of the afflictions we saw back in Egypt. But it tells them, oh, according to the number of rulers of the Philistines, since the same plague has struck both you and your rulers, make images of your tumors and of the rats that are ravaging the land, and give glory to the God of Israel. And perhaps he will lift his hand from you and your God from you and your gods in your land. Why harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened theirs? When he afflicted them, they did not send the people on their way as they departed. Now, therefore, prepare 1 new cart with 2 milk cows that have never been yoked. Hitch the cows to the cart, but take the calves away and pin them up. Take the ark of the Lord and set it on the cart, and in a chest beside it put the gold objects you are sending to him as a guilt offering. Then send the ark on its way, but keep watching it. If it goes up the road to its homeland towards Beth Shemesh, it is the Lord who has brought on us this great disaster. But if it does not, then we will know that it was not his hand that punished us, and that it happened by chance. And so the men did as instructed. They took 2 milk cows and hitched them to the cart and pinned up their calves. And then they put the ark of the Lord on the cart, along with the chest containing the gold rats and the images of the tumors. And the cows headed straight up the road towards Beth Shemesh, staying on that one highway and lowing as they went, never straying to the right or the left. The rulers of the Philistines followed behind them to the border of Beth Shemesh. Now, the people of Beth Shemesh were harvesting wheat in the valley, and when they looked up and saw the ark, they were overjoyed at the sight. The cart came into the field of Yeshua of Beth Shemesh. That's interesting. There's that name again. And stopped there, near a large rock. The people chopped up the cart and offered the cows as burnt offerings to the Lord. And the Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the chest containing the gold objects. They placed them on the large rock. And that day the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and made sacrifices to the Lord. Here's where it gets a little bit weird, right? Because what's the technicalities here? This is the ark separated from the tabernacle, and you're only allowed to make sacrifices at the tabernacle in the presence of the ark. So what are the technicalities of this? Is it okay that they're not at the tabernacle because they have the ark? I'm assuming that that's what they're going with, but it is also interesting to notice that they got rid of whatever carried it up. Right? Because they got rid of the cart and the cows. Right? So, wait, where's it at? Right here. They offered burnt offerings and made sacrifice to the Lord. And when the 5 rulers of the Philistines saw to this, they returned to Ekron. And as a guilt offering to the Lord, the Philistines had sent back 1 gold tumor for each city: Ashdod, Gaza, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. The number of gold rats also corresponded to the number of Philistine cities belonging to the 5 rulers, the fortified cities and their outlying villages. And the large rock on which they placed the ark of the Lord stands to this day in the field of Yeshua of Beth Shemesh. But God struck down some of the people of Beth Shemesh because they looked inside the ark of the Lord. He struck down 70 men, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck them with great slaughter. The men of Beth Shemesh asked, "Who can stand in the presence of the Lord, this holy God? To whom should the ark go up from here?" And they sent messengers to the people of Kiriath Jearim, saying, "The Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up with you." And that's where we're going to wrap today up. This next section starts a whole new section, so we're going to naturally transition away from that. There's a good bit to decode here, right? We got the birth and the dedication of Samuel, how he came to be a Nazirite, how he comes to be the authority. Like, he becomes the authority next. Whereas before there was the Levite priest, they are now gone, and he is assuming the authority when we return. Once again, we have a man that is going to take responsibility for the shaping of this nation. A singular person who is going forward and doing the thing which he is called in his highest estimation to do. That is a recurring theme. Now, sometimes these figures are, in my estimation, misled in the direction that they go, because God did not tell you to beat somebody in the head with rocks because they gathered firewood. That didn't happen. God did not tell you that it's okay to take your leisure with someone and then you can pay her dad and it's okay. That didn't happen. That was not God. And so there are great truths and there are great untruths, and there are good paths and there are bad paths, all contained within this book, and it is up to discernment to find the difference. What we need to take from this story is that if you are doing your due service, as is required of you as a servant of God, right? We are to be willing and humble and all of those things, not reluctantly serving, but willingly giving of our time, and not reluctantly giving up the sins, but willingly giving away the things that hold us back. As long as we are doing that and earnestly seeking God's face after asking his forgiveness, then our path will be made for us. And if we faithfully walk that path, then more will be made for us. And our path will be made clearer as we go along. And that if we veer from that path that we have been called to and set apart in, that the consequences will come too. When we saw Phineas and Eleazar, when we see people die from not faithfully serving, that is a real thing too. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat complicated topic. I know that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and while sometimes I tend to step on people's feet, it is never intentional. I never intentionally set out to hurt anyone's feelings. I am only doing what I feel like I am called to do. And to veer from this path would be worse than what any of these priests did to me, for my soul. And so I do what I do. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You're perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.